Welcome, everyone. I am Jonathan J. Reinhardt, and you are listening to the newest episode of Wargaming Recon. Wargaming Recon is the only member of the TSR Podcast Network to discuss historical and New England gaming. And today we are going to dive into a world inspired by Norse mythology that will take you into a place where you can try to do just about anything you want as long as it's on the tabletop, because we're going to be looking at a brand new role-playing game that's out from WRKS Games, WRKS Games, and it's called Jordenheim. It's inspired by a computer game, and we think this is something that you should all hear about, but you don't have to take my word for it, because we are lucky enough to be joined by the founder of WRKS Games, Kos. Kos, how are you today?
I am very well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having us today.
I am really excited about this, and I've been looking forward to us having this chat. I know we've had to reschedule it for, well, 2020 is an unusual year, right?
It has indeed been an unusual year, but we have gotten there at last.
Yeah, and you have been working so hard, actually, on all sorts of things. I admire that you are juggling a lot of different properties at the moment. Of course, continuing to support your computer game, which I'd love to hear more about. And then this brand new tabletop role-playing game based off a world that you kind of created. Do you want to just tell people a little bit about WRKS Games and kind of its origins and its purpose in life?
Yes, indeed I can. WRKS Games has actually got quite a large philosophy behind it. And way back in the day, about 20 years ago, the very first thing I did in life was start a tabletop publishing company, PDF-based publishing, before it became a thing, called Sylvan Publishing. And then went on from that to do technology, product development as a broad strokes across many industries. But the goal was always to start a game company. And I eventually wound up doing it when I was 41. And there were a couple of things at that point, because of course the idea had evolved, and I wanted to do something quite substantive with this, like something that would occupy the next half of life, building something grand. So WRKS Games has got a pretty big philosophy to it. At its root, we build universes where we're building worlds. That's what we do. And we're good at the lore, the crafting of the lore, the storytelling. We're building these universes of content, and Jordenheim is our first one. And I am Swedish now, naturalized as a Swede, living in the United Kingdom and about to be British. So it's multiple nationalities floating around me there, but I know Sweden very, very well. And I've been interested in Norse mythology since I was a very, very young person. So I feel I got that mythology down pretty well as well. So it seemed like a natural sort of thing. And when we started building this 4 years ago, there was not a lot happening in the Viking-inspired gaming universe world. I mean, there's boatloads now. And we saw it coming, and we are not the only ones who figured out that this is an interesting world to play in. But even with that in mind, we've got something quite unique, because we custom built everything. And the Jordenheim universe is our first universe in which we are building content. So the content is quite diverse. We have PC and console games, which we have one launched. We have our tabletop games, the first one is now out. We have comics, which the first one is out. We have motion comics. The first one is about to be out. And as you progress down this line, as we become more successful as a company, I'd like to see things like a regular YouTube video serial, eventually a movie set in the Jordenheim world. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. But basically, we have long content plans stretching out multiple years across these different verticals inside the Jordenheim universe. And then the idea is to build new universes. So WRKS Games is largely about this. And then it's also about trying to make sure we're adding some value to the industry. So it's not just the philosophy is not simply one of adding consumer value, but also adding industry value, which is where more adventurous things like the WRKS store come in, and we'll get into that later. And also looking at ourselves as an employer, what do we want to be in the form of an employer? Who are we as a company, and defining all of that. So I've had a lot of time to think about all of these things. And as a result of that, the company is in that sort of state where we have like a really clear plan. It goes stretching into the next decade, and we're kind of hitting those milestones a step at a time. And that's basically the company in a nutshell. And we have all of these wonderful people working in the company now.
Yeah, you have quite a team, actually. For those who want to head on over to your website, it's WRKS-games.com. You list a lot of people. And nowadays, with the wonder of being able to do things online, I'm going to guess you're decentralized. Is that true?
Completely, yes. Right from even my company 20 years ago was a virtual company, so I've always been partial to the idea. And I think for us, I mean, because of the stuff that we're trying to do needs to be done at a very high quality, and it also needs to be done, by really, really solid talent. We need to make sure we're recruiting from around the world. It can't be just, England. And so it had to be virtual. And it started out as a little 4-man team in year 1. And we are now 12 people regularly contributing to at some level. I would say it's the lowest amount of contribution would be about 2 to 2.5 days a month it could be voiceover artists or videographers who don't have like regular work to do but are needed from time to time, down to 2 to 3 weeks a month at the top level, which is typically game developers, back-end developers who are needed all the time.
I've noticed, because you have a Discord server as well. I've noticed on there that you engage a lot with your community, and one of the things that you regularly do, and I really like this, is there's a lot of back and forth about development of your computer game property. Why don't we talk about that for a little bit? Because that kind of was an early genesis for all this, wasn't it?
It was. So Bloodborne Into the Shroud is where we all started, which is a PC game. It's a good example of our ethos as a company and how we develop games, because we develop games in very weird ways, not at all in the way companies typically develop games, because normally game development companies are hidden away for a while. They work for years, they build a game, they throw it out there and go, haha, this is our creation, yay. And that's a way to do it. But I also think that, on the one hand, we want to make sure we're building games people actually want to buy. And on the other hand, we're building a consumer product, so we should engage the consumer in that pathway. So the way we build games is we tend to build like a well-functioning prototype, and we throw it out into the community, and then stay in like a developmental state for a year and a half, where our goals and the community's goals find a good, happy middle ground, and it turns into a game everybody actually wants. And Bloodborne is a great example of this, because it started out, we've been in early access for like a year and a half. The game is now in a mature state, and we're about to conclude in December with the finished product. You can play the first 2 chapters on Steam today. And then the full 5 chapters will be rolling now out in December. And this is very much an example of a game that's built by the community, because it looks the way it does, it works the way it does, and has the features it does, because of the stellar community feedback we got for the last 18 months.
What kind of led you to have a heroine? As at a lot of times when people experience these kind of games, they tend to be more from a masculine point of view. Were there any sort of criteria that you had, or was this a particular interest, or what kind of gave that idea into your head?
So another great question, and it speaks once again to our process, because here's another thing we do really differently from other companies. Most game companies begin with a game design document, which is a really detailed description of what the game's going to be. That's not how we start. We start with the story. And we originally decided to start with a story where you could play as the brother or the sister. We started evolving that story, and the way that usually happens, it comes in the form of a script, very similar to a movie script. And as we were writing the script, this is a coming of age tale, and every single game that we develop in the WRKS Games has got to have a real world relational aspect to the gamer. And in this game, we are exploring the relationship a child has with their parents when they're growing up, because it's something we can all relate to, because you've got like your childhood where you think of your parents as heroes. And then as you're growing up, you realize your parents are just humans. And then you've got to have adult relationship with them. How does that work? So what we've done is we've taken that idea and dramatized it into an adventure game where your parents here are literally heroes. But as you grow up in this story, and as the story evolves, you realize that good and bad are shades of gray, that what you thought your parents were or not thought what they were. How do you react to it? How do you find your own heroism and your definition of yourself? That's what we're exploring in this game. And it started out with 2 characters. But what we realized as we were writing it is that how a daughter interacts with her father and mother, and how a son interacts with the mother and father, are totally different. The dialogue is different, how you talk is different, how you view each other is different, how society views you is different. So we realized we would have to create 2 completely different scripts if we were going to do this, and 2 completely different kinds of games. Didn't have the scope, the budget, or the wherewithal to really do both. So we thought, what story do we want to tell? And at the end of the day, it was the story with the heroine at the focus that was the one we wanted to tell. And that's how Astrid wound up winning as the main character.
I think that's really provocative, because you don't see that a lot. In the fact that you really did have that focus of story, I think is huge, because far too often I've encountered electronic games where let's just say they've placed a lot of emphasis on making it flashy and maybe not having as much substance to it, and consequently I personally end up losing interest in them very quickly. But the games that have more of a story to it, or really engage me, have that longer lasting appeal.
A common problem. I have been gaming for a very long time, and I still game every day, and I find I can't stay with most games to the finish line because it's just not engaging enough. And during this year and a half, one of the things that we learned, which was a very gratifying thing indeed, is that every single person who comments on the game comments on the same positive aspects and finds the same flaws, which is very good, because as a game designer, you don't want your game to be 50 different things to 50 different people. And building a game that is the same thing to every person is exactly what we want at WRKS. And the response we've always gotten back is the level of immersion, the depth of the world, the depth of the story, the engagement in Jordenheim as a universe and a world which you can literally explore here. Those are the things we're winning at. The things we were winning less at was things like mechanical things, like combat was not as good as it could be, which we think is true. This is not a combat-focused game, so no one actually cares about that. But from a game design perspective, when you're working on a limited budget and a limited time frame and a limited scope, you always have to pick priorities. And because of the kind of game this was, and because of the kind of story we wanted to tell, we had to focus on a game that was story heavy, exploration heavy, and immersion heavy. And we seem to have, based on the feedback, succeeded with that. And we're getting people who are drawing parallels for like an indie version of Horizon Zero Dawn or Witcher 1, which is great news, because we never mentioned at any point to anybody what games actually served as the inspiration for this game. And those 2 games in particular are 2 of my favorite RPGs, which no doubt had an inspirational part in this subconscious design of the game. So I was really happy to hear that feedback coming unsolicited from people.
I think that you've also really, you talked about having a limited budget, limited resources, right? And of course, the story is the center point. But I think you also really nailed the aesthetics of it. It is a beautiful looking game. Yeah, I've seen the trailers. I've seen some gameplays. It looks like it was made by a much larger studio with many more resources at hand.
Yes, we are very pleased with that particular part. And this is not how we're going to do it in the future. But this particular game was solo developed by me, and we have.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it's a very unusual thing, and it's the quality standard we aim for in the studio is the premium indie AA standard level of game, and I do feel we got there. And if you look at the total amount we spent across all disciplines and all things we did on this game over the 3 years of development, was just barely £400,000. And it's an amazing that we managed to get there on this, something I'm really, really pleased about. And this is a testament to the skills, abilities, and performance levels of the team that worked on it, because the whole team in total was maybe about 6 people over the last 3 years who worked on this game. And as you touched on, it looks like a game that came out of a much bigger studio. And a lot of the great industry and publisher interest we're getting for the game today is because of the fact that we managed to pull this off with such a small budget and such a small team in that amount of time. And I'm super pleased with the look. I mean, I worked for a long time to get that look right. It was a lot of effort. I probably spent about a year just on the aesthetic, because one of the things we didn't want to do is copy other successful games. We wanted to have a look that nobody else had, which meant we had to craft it ourselves. And it looks good in the way that only our game looks good. It doesn't look good like another game. It's just, it looks good like our game, which is something we really badly wanted to do. So I'm very pleased that you think that, and I'm very happy that we got there as a small unit.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, for me, it reminds me of the level of quality and something that you'd see like in a Tomb Raider game, or some of the Elder Scrolls, things of that nature, where there's just so much emphasis placed on appearance, but not for appearance sake, but because, to me anyway, it conveys a deeper meaning of really trying to hone in and tie into the story again, and just kind of calling back to that if you read a novel, for example, especially if you read someone like Dickens or Tolkien, they will describe every blade of grass, whether you want to know it or not. But in a video game, you can't really do that. And so when story is as important, you need to be able to show it in a way so that it conveys that to the user, and for them to have an emotional experience, I think. And I think this is something that users will have who play your game. I think they'll actually just get those warm, fuzzy feelings, and they'll feel connected to the character, which is really important.
Yeah, the aesthetic was actually really story driven, because when we originally launched the Jordenheim universe, one of the first things we did was actually launch the comic. The comic is created by one of our first artists, Cornelia Boysen, a South African young lady who has a stellar talent in this particular line art and coloring bracket. And she was actually employee number 2 in the company. And the aesthetic she put into the comic was so unique. I felt that we needed to bring into the game the idea that you are actually literally playing inside of a comic. I wanted it to feel like you were playing inside comic panels. And the cinematics and the story is told in the game in literal comic panels that pop up and tell you the story as it fills in as you're moving through it. And wanted making the entire game feel like a comic, where you can see line art around every single 3D object, and that not cell shading like in a cartoon, but comic shading. So you can see, like, at a distance, things are shaded more and detailed less, where at the foreground, things are more detailed and shaded in a particular way. This kind of style is how the game plays out in the actual game itself. So it took a lot of effort, and we did it very particularly. Of course, there's never 100% win-win scenario, and this came at one negative cost, which we accepted in the game. It requires quite a chunky PC to play this in a performant way. So unfortunately, low-end PCs would struggle to play the game, whereas you kind of need an upper mid-range and higher PC to really play it well. And I'm hoping that when this now comes out in December, so technically the finished version is coming out next year, and graphic cards these days are very cheap, I'm hoping that people will be well equipped for the majority to actually play the game at its full ultra settings, because it looks sensational at maximum settings.
I'm fascinated by your mention of how the comic came first. And that's, for me, really, that's because I come from a background of, I work in a library, but I used to be a reviewer to help libraries and library staff decide what graphic novels to purchase. And so I've reviewed and written for a variety of things to kind of just talk about all this, and a lot of things that you mentioned. And I've spent a lot of time with comics, as I think is probably common for people of my age. And the Jordenheim one both feels really familiar and so new at the same time. But I absolutely love, and this is totally a personal preference, but I absolutely love the art style. The fact that it hits those points that you mentioned about use of depth and importance of shading, and when to not do that. It has so many callbacks for me to certain classic comics, but also uses things in a nice and new way. It's refreshing and interesting and just kind of, again, immersive. I keep on coming back to the word, and I presume that's intentional on your part. It's such an immersive experience and also so cohesive. You've done a wonderful job of really unifying everything together into one umbrella, and that does not often happen.
No, that's interesting that you noted that, because again, this is an area where we're very odd. What most game companies do is they throw out a bunch of games over a few years, they see which one wins, and then they build a universe around that. So you retrofit the universe to the game after it's built, so it can never be 100% cohesive. We went through because this is a completely self-funded company, and we didn't need to fall victim to the need to run after short-term money or short-term goals. We took a much bolder approach and built the universe first. And this cohesion you're talking about, you get that inherent. I mean, some people will get it very precisely the way you've understood it. Others will get it subliminally and just as a side consciousness thing as they absorb the content. The universe canon is very strict, very cohesive, very well planned, very well written. And that's because we started with the universe first, and everything comes out of the universe. So there's no parts that feel jarring or that feel, well, this is weird, this shouldn't be here. In fact, our content plans stretch into 3 to 5 years. We know what we're doing for the next 3 to 5 years in this universe because we planned it already. And Blood Bond is a three game series that was planned 3 years ago, with the storylines tying across all three games, which is why this cohesion exists. And you can only do that if you have the kind of boldness as a creative studio, the way we are doing things, to really commit to a universe on day one and say, we are going to make this a success, rather than waiting to see what might succeed and then trying to retrofit the lore into it.
I think that's a perfect segue to get to the role-playing game, Jordenheim, because I know a fair, it sounds like I'm boasting, I know a fair number of game designers, thankfully, from doing the show, and a large number of them are involved in the role-playing game space. And almost to a person, I think they would say that for them, a core aspect of role-playing games is the world building and the story involved with it. And me personally, I'm more on a outer sphere, I guess you could say, of role-playing games. I'm making my way a little bit further deeper into it, but I actually had talked with some members of my team who are far more involved with role-playing games about Jordenheim and your world building and the role-playing game. And one of them in particular had just this beautiful comment for me. And her name is Erin, and she said, quote, "I love the lore. Absolutely, positively adore it. Such a beautiful mesh of Norse mythology, gods, monsters, heroes, etc., and Scandinavian historical context, culture, government, geography, etc." Unquote. And she's someone for whom I know enjoys when role-playing games have combat or puzzles and things like that to solve. But for her, it's really about collaborative storytelling. And I know that she had remarked as well that Jordenheim seems to try to tackle a variety of things that may not normally play well together, and yet generally manages to do it. Do you want to kind of just extrapolate on the role-playing game and your vision for it, and just kind of some of your actual gameplay goals for it? I know you didn't do the gameplay mechanics so much, but that just kind of maybe some criteria or an ethos that you wanted to instill into the role-playing game.
Yeah, certainly can. First of all, how awesome that she got that from the book, and this is something we've again, from a game design point of view, which is very validating for us. Is this was also a product that had a really specific game design focus, and when we design games in the company, I lay down the framework of what I want, the structure, the ethos, but I let other people fill it, because it is important to have specialists do what they do well. And no one person is ever going to be a specialist at everything. And the bit, if you look at what my role in game design is, and that was true for this product as well, is to make sure that that framework, the structure, the ethos, the alignment with the universe is correctly put together. And when we designed this game, there were a few really specific things. A role-playing game book like this is it's a product. So in a digital form, in a printed form, it's a product, and we wanted a very, very high quality, beautifully executed product. And then content-wise, this was designed, the Jordenheim RPG is actually 3 books. And this is the first of the 3 books, and we knew it would take us 2 to 3 years to get all 3 books out. So we needed a rule book, a core rule book that had a setting in it and a rule set in it. So we knew this was going to be a pretty meaty book. But as you say, role-playing games are primarily about storytelling. And something we found in tabletop games as the industry has matured is that stuff's gotten pretty damn complicated. I mean, the storytelling part gets interrupted because the mechanics are so complicated. And to some degree, Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm amazed at what an amazing job Hasbro has done since acquiring Wizards of the Coast in bringing this to the mainstream. But something I found with D&D a lot is that the flow of storytelling dies in combat because you've got so much dice rolling and so much mechanics and bits involved that the GM just can't progress the story. So one thing we wanted to do was to have a really in-depth lore and setting from which ideas and adventures can spring. And we spent a good third of the book on the setting. So you have the Jordenheim world in all of its glory, the geography, the culture, the economy, the structure, the power struggles, everything's there. And as one reviewer of ours quoted very well, even a cursory skimming of that ideas will spring to mind. And this is exactly what we wanted to do with the setting. We wanted it to be a place where GMs read it and go, I can tell stories in this. And I can tell a lot of stories in this. Because it may be, a year before we get the next book out because we spend some time on these things. And I think that was kind of one of the core design focuses. Then the problem I had with that is, what then do we do with the rules? Because picking the rule set here is no picnic, because again, we're universe focused first. If I pick a rule set for the Jordenheim universe, every single game we build on in this universe is going to be based off this rule set. So it has to be a winner to start with. And we have a design ethos in the company where we want any game we do to appeal to hardcore gamers, but to be accessible to novice gamers. It should be pick up and play for those that want to at the top level, at the surface level, and for those that wish to dig into depth, it should be there. So Dan, who is the writer of the mechanics, the rule set, we borrowed it from way back in the day, 20 years ago when I had Sylvan Publishing. I met Dan then. And helped him publish the Eldritch rule set, which was the precursor to this rule set, which is now called Plyphony. And he took a version of that and crafted a Jordenheim-specific variant of the Plyphony rule set. And one of its values is the fact that despite the fact that there's a lot of dice and mechanics involved, there's not a lot of rolling involved. So you can have a fast-paced combat session that flows nicely in narrative and drama and action with very fluid dice rolling and mechanics in there to actually resolve the gameplay. And it was a clever feature rule set in that way. It has all the depth of what you'd expect from an advanced system that can be built on, that can be extended, that can be customized. But at the face level, you can spend 20 minutes learning how to play it and then just get on with it. And it had all of that virtue. And I'm going to credit Dan with having done a sensational job of taking the framework that I gave him and built out the lore behind Jordenheim in a sensational way. And we're seeing this from multiple reviews. We're very, very pleased with how the lore turned out. And a very experienced editor, Eva, is in charge of maintaining cohesion, consistency, and quality on our books. And the collaborative effort between Eva and Dan is what is the result you're seeing in front of you there.
Now, I know those who are really into role-playing games, if you were to ask them what systems they really like or which ones they play the most, you could have a 10-year conversation with them about it. And that also makes it, I think, hard for some of them because they are so invested in certain pre-existing systems, for them to be willing to try something new without having any sort of reference point or familiarity. So on that point, in knowing that Jordenheim is its own thing, it's separate and it's different, what sort of zones of commonality would it have to maybe some other major role-playing game systems or mechanics that might feel comfortable to people?
Okay, so to answer the first part of the question, this is something that came up in playtesting. And we found during playtesting that people struggled a little bit to understand the system because there wasn't anything strictly like it, so there's no point of reference. And in order to deal with that, we have created quick start guides. So the book comes with quick start guides. We also have YouTube videos being created now as well to help people get up and running fast without needing to get overly bogged down into the details of the book for their first gaming experience. So we've tried to onboard people snappily that way. However, I would say it does share a great deal of commonality in principle with a lot of dice-based D20 stylish role-playing games. There are, however, some areas where we have diverted. So, for example, there is no real reason to have a character's stat blocks like strength, defense, power, etc. be like a bunch of numbers, and then traits and abilities be a completely different set of mechanics. So in this game, there's no difference. I mean, basically, they're all traits and abilities. You've got some basic set of traits and abilities that are your character's traits and abilities. So courage, devotion, perception, power, repute, speed, that govern your character. Then you've got your abilities like archery and brawling and blades, and you can add those as you need to. The first 6 are common to everyone. And they all work in exactly the same way. It's a tree structure. You've got a base ability and you have a bunch of sub-abilities, and you can specialize along the way. So I think anybody who's kind of used to working in a abilities and tree structure like learning cycle to their character development will pick this up and play very easily, because there's no other statistics to learn. Everything is a base ability and then a bunch of sub-abilities. Everyone can and most likely will get the base ability, and then you specialize in the sub-abilities. It's pretty simple. And all of these abilities have got 5 ranks of skill. You're either average, respectable, skilled, great, or phenomenal at it. And based on that, that adds a die roll that modifies your die roll when you are executing it at any given time. And then we've tried to make the rolling fluid so that you can do your attack, defense, and your damage levels or defense levels with the same die roll, instead of doing it across multiple die rolls. Even though different dice are used for different things, you typically only need to roll it once to carry out an entire combat round, well, which makes that very fluid as well. So I think if you are used to multi-die mechanics as a general baseline norm, and you are used to traits and abilities-based role-playing games, you will get into this very quickly.
It kind of reminds me, and maybe this was some sort of subconscious decision there. It kind of reminds me of like a tech tree in, say, playing like an Age of Empires kind of game or a Civilization kind of game, where you're learning whatever ability for your nation, so to speak, in this case, in your person, and then you become more proficient in it, and then you progress from like code of laws to writing to having, so forth and so forth. Just kind of having that sort of nature to it, so you can also kind of map out, I think, more easily how you want to go. As I mentioned, my experience with role-playing games is more limited, but one of the things that I've often found frustrating is that when creating a character and also looking at potential character leveling up, so to speak, it's kind of hard to have all the necessary information for the traits and abilities and so forth in a easy to find and easy to use place without flipping back and forth between a lot of pages. So having something like this, almost like a flow chart, really can be, I think, very user friendly.
Well, this is exactly like a tech tree. I mean, in fact, I think one of the things that one of our early reviewers did was actually describe it as an ability tree, which is exactly what it is. It's an ability tree basically, and it's a nice way to describe it as well, because it's quite easy to understand. Once you kind of get into it, it clicks pretty easily. So it's a nice way to actually use it. And also there are negative traits, by the way. There are disadvantages as well. So everything's not positive. You can choose to have a character with disadvantages as well, and you will acquire disadvantages as you play along.
Ooh. A thing for me recently is an interest in unusual characters and abilities and playing styles. And I'm going to completely give this as inspiration from a Twitch channel that I've been watching. Nerd Botchery is this fellow on Twitch who does D&D 5e games using Dwarven Forge terrain. He has this whole gigantic, beautiful table. And what he's doing right now, which really fascinates me, is he has this one campaign that he's doing, and he has two separate parties that are playing. And one party plays as their standard good characters, and the other one are evil. And very rarely have I encountered anyone being willing to have a game where characters have to be evil, genuinely evil, and it's so not in the script. And I like that in the ability tree for Jordenheim, you aren't always trying to have that positive attribute. That the option exists for you to have maybe a little more depth and nuance in it by having.
It does indeed, and we actually get into it even with the classes, because you have what you kind of expect in the form of classes. I mean, you've got like the berserker, who's like your traditional. It's the Viking warrior you imagine when you think white Viking warrior, gigantic, 2 axes, yada yada yada, which is great. But then you also have because this world is happening at a time when Christianity, well, we have an invented religion called Christianity with a K, but basically Jordenheim is built on an inspiration of history from medieval times in Sweden during the time when Christianity was coming into the region. It was challenging the existing pantheon and the pagan beliefs, and society was changing. So there's also different classes of warriors, because there's like the more traditional European militia, which came with that contingent of missionaries that came that way. So you can play a Hermadur, which is basically a sword and shield, fully armored, in leather mostly, but armored character, which is more the traditional professional soldier. There are multiple mage classes, but we have a very interesting one called the God Touched, because as part of the law in Jordenheim, only women can be witches, as in mages, because the gods have selected women to carry the power of the gods and be a conduit and function as a go-between between the mortal realms and the shroud, which is the magical realms. And they are the keepers of the balance, similar to a druid in medieval European lore. And only women are allowed to wield this magic. Occasionally, however, a man is imbued with it, usually accidentally. These people are God touched, and they can only carry wild magic. And as they progress in life, they get ever more crazy and mad, eventually self-destructive. And I can imagine that playing a God touch is going to make for some entertaining times in some game character, because similar to the Cthulhu mythos, eventually you are going to go mad and die. The question is whether or not you're going to take out your entire group on the way out. And so you can have some fun with the God Touched. And you can imagine from a role-playing perspective, imagine having a rune caster, which is a really traditional witch that doesn't even cast spells, but imbues things with spells through runes. Very, very close to the old pagan gods, in a party together with a Hermadur, which is basically a knight whose entire purpose in life is to protect missionaries of Christianity in the same party. This is going to make for some great role-playing moments. So I'm hoping people roll with this.
It's brilliant. Your description of the God Touch has me laughing because I can picture it. It's wonderful.
There's actually a God Touched in the PC game, and I'm not going to spoil the story here because it is a pivotal part of the story. But you actually run into a God Touched in the PC game as well.
I love it. I'm someone who, when I have played role-playing games, and I think I played, are you familiar with a game called Torg? It's an older game where you basically can go to a variety of different planets and spaces, and each one has its own rules. Some might be magic heavy or tech heavy. You can travel through time. There might be dinosaurs that wield lightsabers or whatever.
Doesn't ring a bell.
It's a very older game. That and Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, which I know is notorious for people, but that was my foray into D&D. And I tend to gravitate towards one of two types of characters, either a magic user, in part because that's what I've played when I've played World of Warcraft, and also a paladin, for my personal sense of right and wrong, and just the way that you're kind of twisting these common tropes it's delicious. I love it. I really like it.
Paladin class, the literal Christian missionary is a very reminiscent of a paladin. It's called a Prestur in the game, and he's the only class in the game that gets magic from the Christian god and not from the pagan gods. So he is your equivalent of the paladin class. I would say the one, this has been noted by one of the reviewers of the game as well, and I do think it's a downside, and it's a downside we're eventually going to fix. You can only play humanoid classes.
Oh, okay.
Right now in the core rulebook, every class has got to be a human. This is intentionally so. We are going to roll out in the future the rule set and the way to do. It's quite complicated to do this. We didn't want to rush it for this book because you have to. The baseline rules still need to work, and there's quite a lot of game testing we need to do around this. But this is a good time to talk about the Shroud, because the Shroud is basically where magic lives. And way back in the history of Jordenheim, the Shroud and the rest of the world was one. And as the Viking population started to become more dominant, more growth, and challenge the gods and challenge the magic, the Shroud kind of receded from areas. Like in the Denmark region, there is no Shroud, because that's the part that connects it to the rest of the world. That's fully civilized. Magic is banned. You're not allowed to be a magic user. There's money, wealth, economy, and Christianity. And then as you head out into Sverige, which is kind of the middle ground where the two are in good sync, in Noria, you have very heavy use of Shroud magic, and there's a lot of closeness to the Shroud. You can dip into it kind of like a fog. And when you dip into it, you're into the Shrouded Realm, which has its own ecologies and its own systems, but it kind of exists as a plane on the rest of the world. In Suomi, however, which is where Finland is today, they rejected modern life and modern meaning like modern medieval life and civilizational growth, and they are completely at one with the Shroud the way it was in ancient times. So the Suomi border is very well protected by monsters and gods and towards the rest, but inside the Suomi lands, man and magic live side by side. You can wander into a Suomi town and be sold the local beverage by a troll at a bazaar right next to a human character. So there's intermingling between the races, and this is where mixed classes and mixed races come in. This is why we didn't rush this in the core rulebook, because this is an entire book by itself. The playable creature classes are coming, but in order to do it in a lore-aligned, properly structured, properly explained way, because this of course opens up a can of worms. And how exactly does a troll mate with a human? And where does the little mini god come from? What is a deity or a demigod? And the Viking mythology is full of demigods, tons of them. So we need to have a really good anchor point for this in the game. So we didn't want to rush it in the core rulebook, but it is coming.
I love it. There's so much attention to detail, and I tell you that, in my experience, does not exist in many properties.
Yeah, we did spend 2 to 3 years on just the lore happening in parallel to all the other stuff going on.
Wow. One of the things that I would like to touch on, and I think this is something that can be helpful to people who, well, I was going to say who are new to this, but it's a new game, so everyone's new to it. But to really kind of help them maybe to dip their toes in without feeling overly invested, is that on your storefront where people can buy the book, you actually have, and I'm looking at it right now, but you have some free sample PDFs of things like a character sheet and some of the characters. So like Astrid, for example, I happen to be looking at right here. It's a free quick PDF download. And I think in this day and age, this kind of stuff is a necessity, but not every organization or company does it. But I think this is just really helpful for people to see what a character might look like and to be able to then print off as many blank character sheets as they need to create their own characters and things like that. And I think it can kind of help people to piece together how things can and maybe should look.
Yep.
What sort of thinking went into this on your end, and what kind of importance for not only for creating it and doing it, but also for making it accessible and the design of character sheets, for example, and the layout and things like that?
Okay, so yeah, I do think this is a necessity, and partly this is part of our quick start and onboarding process for gamers to be able to preview what this experience is going to be like before they buy the book, because this is a premium product. It sells for $24.99. Considering the fact that it's a 142-page book, that's a pretty good value for money there. But still, it's not a cheap product. And so at the end of the day, we wanted to do a few. I do think that a lot of what we do contains a lot of free content and then some high-end premium content. And this is a good example of this. We do have freely downloaded pre-generated characters, so you can pick up and play directly for every class. We have a character sheet that you can download and play with, and automatically updates the values as you add them in. Right, and then the site itself, Jordenheim.com, is basically as a whole a preview of the RPG. When you click around the site and explore, and this site was designed to be embraced in content, as in explored over time, you will get a pretty good understanding of a preview of what the game is and the world is like. So there's basically mini tasters of all aspects of the game available in the site. And you can just take a browse around, get into it, look at the regions, get a flavor for the artwork. You can see the amazing map work there that was done by Dominic and Florian, our artist. These are all the entire. This is a gigantic 4K map that's entirely hand drawn of the entire. Every single piece of thing on there is a hand drawn line and shading. And this map is huge. It's absolutely huge. And you are currently looking at about 1/4 of the map right now. So it's an enormous piece of work. So the entire site is basically a preview of the RPG itself. And there's a lot of content there. I mean, if you look at the blogs, the short stories, the flavor content, and take it all in, you'll probably be spending, a good day or two on the site before you absorbing content, before you're even ready to buy the game.
It's a beautiful website. It really is. Can tell a lot of time went into it, and I played around with it because one of the things that I often look at is whether a website is responsive, which might not be a phrase that is common to a lot of people, but basically it just kind of means, does it play well, whether you're on a mobile device or on a desktop computer or a laptop or all that? Does it look well, and how does it work with that? And an easy way to tell something is responsive is if you open up a web browser and you just resize the window. and if it resizes and you can still do stuff without things getting cut off and it's still usable, it's responsive. And things should be responsive now, nowadays on the web. Not everything is.
This is a fully mobile optimized site. In fact, most of our visitors, well, not most, I would say, we're currently looking at just over 1/3 of our visitors are on mobile devices or iPads or tablets. So everything we do is responsive.
It's fantastic, and that's how it should be. Not everyone does that, as I've learned in my experience. But it matters. It really matters, because in the days when you could actually be out playing a game in person somewhere with people, you're not going to be, most likely not going to be lugging around a computer with you, but you might have your smartphone or you might have a tablet, and being able to pull something up on the website if you need to and have it right there is very important.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And everything is, the reason the site looks lovely is because of the artwork from Florian and Dominic, of course. We are our artist duo on the Jordenheim site. well, on the Jordenheim universe, they do all the concept artwork for the game as well, and all the artwork for our web, social media, and content, and the stellar pair of artists.
It's beautiful. It's really just simply beautiful. Do you want to talk some about your storefront? Because you have a whole separate website for it. Work Store.
Work Store has been soft launched. It's been quite a mission for the last 6 months. So this began with, again, this falls into that vertical of what in this work that we're doing, how do we benefit the industry as a wider whole? And I do believe that, well, even on the PC side, we've got Steam, and on the tabletop side, we have Drive-Thru RPG, which have been two stores or digital outlets that have really enabled the idea of digital distribution for people. Both of these outlets monopolize their industry sectors, and both take 30-35% cut whenever a publisher or a creator publishes a book through them. And whereas these guys were instrumental in creating the industry, and their effort and input and influence cannot be overstated. We do have at this point in both the PC and in the tabletop world a situation where there's a very great maturity in the industry. There are a lot of players. There's opportunity for lots of people to get involved. And we're also in a situation where an independent developer, a small one-man band or a small team, giving up 30% of their revenue is just not going to result in a living wage. And one of the problems we wanted to solve with the store is how can we utilize modern technology to provide a storefront that is so efficient on the technology side that we can reduce that cost that as a storefront we charge to the end to the developer or the creator to £1. We only want to take £1 per download. So in this case, you're looking at a product that says $3.35. When somebody buys that product for $3.35, the creator gets $2.35 of that. And you can imagine for more premium products, once this starts getting to 10, 15, 20, 30 pounds, they're holding on to a huge amount of that value, which is exactly what we wanted. And the way we've done this is by harnessing modern technology in a really good way. So one thing that is somewhat hidden about Works is that we have really strong technology capacity. Buried deep in the company, in the back end that is not seen by anyone, are two stellar developers, and I myself am a technologist from 20 years ago. We are creating foundational technology for the stuff that we do in the company that's buried away, that's quite advanced. And that has allowed us to push the value we've gotten out of that. The benefit has been pushed to the creators. So all of these guys who are selling products on our store right now are benefiting from the £1 per download cost that they have against us, and everything else they keep. And then from the user point of view, there's also a couple of things we wanted to do here. I do think that Drive-Thru and Steam, despite its many, many benefits they brought to the industry, they trained consumers in one really terrible thing: sale prices. There's so many sales that we've kind of been educated as consumers to wait for a sale to buy a product. And this in turn has caused the industry to believe that products will not sell unless they're discounted to stupid levels, thus precipitating the issue that developers can't make any money, so they can't build new products. And we have actually decided very boldly and possibly suicidally, we'll find out over time, to have no sales. We are encouraging the publishers and creators on the store to price your product fairly and sell at a fair price and create genuine value proposition for consumers. And we're also encouraging consumers to buy at the actual face value, so that these people who are working hard at creating these products can actually make money off it and continue to create great products for us, which is really in everybody's best interest. So that was a really big difference between other stores and our one. And then the second equally important one is discovery. Because if you take a look at any of these major monopolized stores, there are so many products on there that it's virtually impossible to be discovered as an indie player. So this page you're looking at, which is our primary product discovery page, is completely randomized. There are no top lists. There are no lists of who's selling better than other people. There's no weighting of any kind between one person's product to another. Every single time you come to this front page, you'll be hit by an equally randomized amount of products and even our own products go into that own algorithm. We do not highlight our products over other people's.
Wow. that is quite an undertaking you've done.
It is indeed. And this is currently just for tabletop RPGs, but in January we're rolling out the PC store as well. And we're also going to be rolling out game-related music and game-related art that will be purchasable from the store, along with print on demand for both PDFs and the art stuff. And we're going to be rolling out premium. It's a very premium print on demand concept. I don't think we can really innovate on print on demand as a feature. But what we have done is teamed up with the largest print on demand player on the planet. And we can do, in fact, here is a sneak preview of the upcoming Jordenheim RPG printed book.
Ooh, nice.
It is a glorious product. And this is currently not available, but will be available in the next few months. And this is the quality standard of print on demand that you can get from the store for any book that's above 24 pages. It is fully hardcover, full color, Mohawk bound, and prints in any size from 24 pages upwards to any amount of hundreds of pages. And it is shipped and printed locally or as locally as possible to the person doing the ordering. So this is a premium print on demand version, but you're going to get a version of the book that is a genuine collectible, and it'll last a long time. All of even the inside pages are matte coated. You can pour liquid on it and it'll slide right off.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, the only downside is it makes it expensive, especially if you're buying a big book. It's going to be pretty expensive, but you will only need to buy it once in your life, and you'll have it for the rest of your life. And that's the model we're trying to provide in the form of print on demand on the site.
Do you happen to have a price point for the print on demand Jordenheim?
It kind of depends on how many units you're buying, but we're assuming people are going to buy one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are printing and shipping in Europe, it's likely to wind up at the 45 to 50 pound range.
Okay.
With the PDF currently at 24, or actually 20 on our site, because we don't have to add 30% in order to cover the cost somewhere else. So it's about twice the price of the PDF. So it's not terrible, but it is a reasonable price. I mean, it's actually comparable in pricing to the D&D books, I guess, and also relatively comparable in size. So what we've told our creator base to prepare for this is to make sure that if you're going to activate print on demand, make sure your book is built with the kind of quality standards and the attention to detail to make it worth it. Because when you're buying a product that's 24 to 32 pages, and you wind up paying maybe, 25, 30 pounds for that, including shipping, you really want that to be a stellar piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
We are not going to enforce quality standards on products, because as a store owner, we need to be careful about going, this is the standard we want, because it's ultimately there for the consumer, and we don't want to be judging people based on our standards. So we're not going to restrict people doing it, but we have warned creators and developers that you need to make sure you have a really good quality product that's worth the price.
That's good. You mentioned that people can buy Jordenheim on the Work store. Is that the only place that they can purchase it?
It is. Our tabletop RPGs will be exclusively from our store. However, for other players who are on our store, the deal is non-exclusive. They can be on as many stores as they want, but our products are exclusively available from our store only.
That makes sense. It's a good way to get people to come there and see all the other options that are there.
Indeed, we're hoping they'll discover a whole bunch of other people while they're buying our stuff.
That's fantastic. So you've already kind of touched on some of your plans for the future, but what are some other things that people can expect? You mentioned how the video game comes out in December, and you have more stuff going on with Jordenheim, some plans for books, but going into 2021 and beginning in the end and maybe 2022, what'll be coming from Works?
Yes, we have a lot going on. Well, first of all, in the world of Blood Bond series, as I said, it's a 3-game series. Blood Bond Into the Shroud will be followed by it's Jarl of Guilon, which is a continuation of Astrid's tale as she comes back to her old village and rebuilds it. That's going to be a city builder, a mission-based city builder, a PC game and console game. which will then also be followed by Raising Hell, which tells the story of Astrid's father in an action RPG, which will be our first multiplayer title. And will be also a PC and console title and come out in mobile as well. And the Jordenheim RPG universe is going to be expanded with 2 books. The World book is coming out, which is a whopping 74-page deep dive of lore into the Jordenheim universe, even deeper than we've gone in the core rulebook. And that's going to be followed by well, I actually haven't got a name for the 3rd book yet, but it's basically going to be a combination of like a monster manual and a spell compendium.
Cool.
So those are already in the plans, and they're gonna start being the PC games are started prototyping. The books will start being written from Q1 of next year onwards for publication in late 2021 and 2022. But perhaps the most exciting stuff I can talk about right now, because we have just teased this, and the real teaser of this will come, more closer to December, January. We're going to be launching our 2nd universe, which is going to be called Katana Ra, which is a mix of feudal Japanese culture and cyberpunk. So augmented samurais wielding guns in a world that fuses all the folklore-driven magic and mayhem that is Japanese mythology, which is a remarkable thing. Japanese mythology is really weird. It doesn't have a mythos. It's just by word distributed folklore. It's demons, possessions, darkness, magic. It's a fantastic mythology that is very rarely properly depicted. So we are going to go into as deep as we have gone with Jordenheim over the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to go into the world of Katana Ra, which is going to begin with 3 PC games over the first 3 to 5 years, along with another RPG setting, which is also a 3-book series, which will be announced next year. And that will have a completely different rule set as well. And then towards the tail end of next year, we'll announce our 3rd universe, and we're going to stick to 3 universes for a while. The 3rd universe is called Native Land, and it explores the Americas during the era of colonization, but purely from the view of the American Indians. And we're going to tell that part of the world as a mix between a historical setting and a magical setting that, again, is about trying to build a universe that people don't talk enough about. And mythology and folk tales and structure of American Indian lore and history is super interesting stuff, and it's very storytelling driven. So we have got those 3 universes, though that will also roll out in 3 PC console games and 3 RPGs, or all the way up to 2025. So that block of time and content is now already blocked in, and we will start working on it over the coming months. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Wow. You're putting your roadmap to good use.
Indeed. The Katana Ra we are particularly excited about, because we've also got a very, very, I mean, it's a world that everybody inherently likes the idea of samurais and Japanese culture, but nothing has really properly deep dived into it. And I think that many people, I think, will be surprised by is how dark Japanese mythology is. It's really dark. It's monsters, possessions, demons. It's really dark. It's quite fascinating because, Jordenheim is kind of a positive energy universe. Katana Ra is going to be a very dark, universe of combat and adversity and triumph and honor. And Native Land is a really bright and positive universe of spiritual, personal growth storytelling. So across these 3 universes, we have an enormous variety of games and stories to tell.
I'm a big fan of, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, the graphic novel series Usagi Yojimbo, which talks about feudal Japan with anthropomorphic animals as the characters, and the main character is a rabbit. But a lot of the stories that pop up are these darker mythology inspired, religion inspired stories there with, like you mentioned, demon possessions and kami that come out that you don't really know what it is. And it's almost like a murder mystery in some regards. And it is very dark. It can be very disturbing, but really interesting too. It's a different way to look at things.
It is. I think because we are quite a broad thinking game developer, we have to kind of appeal to different groups, and we certainly expect people to cross over these universes and embrace and enjoy them. But I also think that certain universes will appeal to some people and more so than others. Not everybody enjoys the dark stories. And there are different ways to tell the dark stories. Like you've noticed our distinct visual style in Blood Bond. I am now starting to prototype the first game in the Katana Ra universe, and we have a really, really bright visual style telling an incredibly dark story. So there's a great conflict in that as well, where you can embrace a certain brightness of like that modern, beautiful cartoon style that you see in Japanese artwork and in Japanese modern cartoons, but then underneath it is this incredibly deep and dark story that then will sit there haunting you afterwards. Which is kind of the kind of balance we want to set for that world, because it's when you're building in Japanese culture, you've got so many different art styles, and our artists are currently working on trying to map out what art style we're going to try to use for this. And there's already so many different ways to go, and they're all fantastic. So it's going to be an amazing world. We're going to be spending a lot of time on Katana Ra over the next 18 months. Because the native land is still probably a good year and a half away before we really do anything. But the next big thing we have to do is the unveiling, launch, and the realization of the Katana Ra universe over the next 18 months to the same level of depth we have now done with Jordenheim. And I think it will give people who a real alternative, because we're going from medieval fantasy to really ultra modern, but fused with very feudal inspired environments, structures, cultures, society. It just happens to be technologically advanced, and the cyberpunk stuff is also done very differently from how cyberpunk is currently done. So it's going to be an interesting thing to unveil, and I hope people dig it when we're done with it.
That's exciting. With all the things that are happening over at WRKS, what are some of the best ways for people to keep in touch and stay up to date with all of the many different universes and the progress being made on each of the properties?
Right. Great question. I would say picking a social media of your choice in Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram and following our social media is a very, very good. Amanda, by the way, is our voiceover artist. And is picking the one you like best. I think is the best way. We do social media very differently from many companies. We don't respond to what's happening in the world, particularly. We don't respond to trends. Our social media is designed to tell the stories we need to tell about the company and about what we're doing. So I think I'm not going to force anybody to follow social media, of course, very much a personal choice. If you are a social media user today, feel free to follow any of our social media. Any one will do. And if you are not, if you go to the WRKS Games site, at the very bottom, there is a form you can fill in to be informed. Once every quarter, I will send out an email newsletter to give you the hit list of stuff that has happened that you need to know about. It's basically just one condensed email once every quarter that you will get from me that will tell you everything that's happened in the quarter before and point you in the direction of things that may interest you. And if you are not a internet user or prefer email, that's the way to go.
There are so many different social media platforms out there. Which ones are used by WRKS?
We use Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but for slightly different things. I mean, as a general rule, the important stuff is going to come out in all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
I would say our primary platform is Twitter. And Twitter is good for staying up to speed on the overall stuff that's going on a very frequent basis. Facebook is good as well. I know that the Twitter is largely where the PC gaming crowd hangs out. Facebook is where the tabletop gaming crowd hang out. And we use these two things equivalently. So I would say it's either or. You don't need to be on both. We do have a Facebook page. We do have a Twitter account. Follow either or. You will get exactly the same content. Instagram is a little bit different. Instagram is very heavily visually driving our art and the stories around our art. We tend to be followed on Instagram by artists who like what our artists are doing. So if you want to embrace yourself in the visual flavor of the universes and content that we do, Instagram is the place for you.
And how would users find you on each of these platforms?
We are under Works Games on all of them. So it's
Oh.
it's Instagram.com Works Games / Twitter or Facebook.com / Works Games.
Fantastic. I know with all the different ways to spell and the character limitations on usernames and things like that, sometimes people come up with.
Don't hyphenate on those. It's Works Games as one word.
Mhm.
There's no hyphen because you're not allowed to have hyphens in those names. But so it's one word. But and you'll also find links on the actual Works Games website. You'll find links to all of our social media, and of course, if you feel in a chatty mood, join our Discord. And there is a Discord link off of our website as well. And you will access the team directly. I'm always there. And Kathy, our community manager, is very frequently there. Amanda's there. There's a whole bunch of people there. And in fact, quite a few of the publishers and creators that are on our store are there too.
That's fantastic. You have such a comprehensive picture and plan, and it is truly refreshing. Really.
It does make the whole business of being a company much easier as well, because no one is sitting there scratching their heads going, what do we do next? I can literally whip out a document and go, we're doing that next. Right? Because
That's helpful.
It makes life a lot simpler for everybody.
Well, and I think too, since you're a smaller organization, you can be more nimble, but there's also more pitfalls, and so having plans and being as prepared as you are helps to further guarantee your success.
It does, and it also enables a lot of partnerships, because we don't want to be going solo on these things. And one of the nice things in the model that we have is, despite being an indie developer with a very specific focus and a plan of how we build games, we are partnering with other publishers to actually bring those games to market. So we co-publish everything. Like the PC game is being published in Europe and Americas by a German company called Humanitas. And because of the way we structure how we do our development and how we do our intellectual property, we can share the revenue, because these partners are vital for us, because they bring the products to market in areas we would, just publishing on drive-thru or Steam is not enough, because you need every local country in the world has their local version of Steam. And then some people don't want to buy online. They want to go to a store and buy a retail copy. So these publishing partners do an incredible amount of value for us. So we're trying to add more and more partners to the mix now to bring our future games out in a shared fashion. So it does allow us to be very clear about our mission, and then also go, where can we add value and where do we need help? And we start building these partnerships up, and then everybody wins.
That's delightful. That's really such a great cooperative and collaborative way to do it. And be nice if more individuals approach things in life that way.
It would indeed. Yes, definitely working very well for us. So we can recommend it heartily.
That's wonderful. Well, we've had such a wonderful time here to dive into all these different properties and universes, and I am just really grateful for you to take the time out of your schedule to join us here at Wargaming Recon to talk about all this.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Been looking forward to a while. It's great that we finally managed to do it, and it was a great conversation. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, I want to thank everyone who's listened to this episode of Wargaming Recon. I want to remind you that you should, of course, go and check out Works Games, all the stuff that they have there. Whether you're a computer gamer and you want to pick up some stuff on Steam, you want to go to the Works store and buy properties, and be sure to pick up Jordenheim. You can, of course, do that. And then if you would like to, you can, of course, support Wargaming Recon. We have merch available, so you can check us out at wargamingrecon.bigcartel.com. We have t-shirts, we have polos, both in unisex men's and women's designs, and we have a brand new duffel bag that would be great for lugging around, I don't know, printouts of a Jordenheim PDF, or maybe a tablet that you're going to be carrying with you to look up stuff online, some minis and dice and things like that to play some games, all at some pretty good prices. And you can check that out and get that stuff there. Thank you again for being on the show. And I just want to remind everyone that no matter how busy you are, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how much time you're thinking, do I really want to be God touched? I think the answer is yes. You know that you need to, you have to keep on gaming.